And we are back for prepping for winter with the Arianne sample chapters. When we last left Arianne, her and her companions were just beginning their quest to meet Jon Connington after he sent a letter to Doran Martell. Though Arianne's ex-boyfriend and sworn shield Elia Sand was highly skeptical that Jon Connington was real. And now let's continue. In the Boneway and the Prince's Pass, two Dornish hosts had massed. And there they sat, sharpening their spears, polishing their armor, dicing, drinking, quarreling, their numbers dwindling by the day, waiting for the Prince of Dorne to loose them on the enemies of House Martell. Waiting for dragons, for fire and blood, for me. One word from Arianne and those armies would march. So long as the word was dragon. If instead the word she sent was war, Lord Ironwood and Lord Fowler and their armies would remain in place. The Prince of Dorne was nothing if not subtle. Here, war meant wait. So we hear that the Fowler host sits in the Prince's Pass and the Ironwood host sits in the Boneway, awaiting battle. Now this long wait for battle is a parallel to the other battle fronts of fire, blood, and ice. The Yunkai host awaits the Volantines to join them, Euron awaits the Redwyne fleet, and Winterfell waits for Stannis, who in turn waits for the Freys. Interestingly, Arianne has been given code words by Doran for the Fowler and Ironwood hosts. Dragon means war, while war means wait. Now, from a safety point of view, it would be outrageously stupid to have your code word for wait be war. One can choose any code word. Why use a word that might be misinterpreted and lead to thousands of deaths? No, it seems pretty likely that Doran is scheming here. Of course, Doran knows there is no actual dragon, and Elia Sand seems intent on having the diplomatic mission of Arianne fail. It seems quite likely that Arianne will be sending the word war to the two hosts and not dragon. At this point, it seems pretty likely that either one or both of the hosts will not know the code word and go forward in opposition to Arianne's intended message of wait. Of course, a mix-up in code words most affects the Ironwood host, which is sitting in the Boneway. The Ironwoods have had a very troubled relationship with the Martells and have historically supported Blackfires. It would make some sense for Doran to throw that host into war and to have them killed off. As for the Fowlers, they're over in the Prince's Pass and are rather far from battle. Giving them the wrong code word really wouldn't do much. I don't see too much use in sending the Fowlers up against House Foot of Nightsong. At mid-morning on the third day, Ghost Hill loomed up before them, its chalk-white walls shining against the deep blue sea of the Sea of Dorne. From the square towers at the castle's corners flew the banners of House Tolland, a green dragon biting its own tail upon a golden field. The sun and spear of House Martell streamed atop the great central keep, golden red and orange, defiant. So Ghost Hill seems to be named for the castle, which is white like a ghost standing on a hill. And we should remember that ghosts are a remnant of something from the past. The question is, what element from the past is our author directing us to? Above Ghost Hill, we hear about the Tolland banners, a banner of a dragon biting its own tail. This banner came about after Aegon's failed invasion of Dorne, and back in the Soiled Knight chapter, Arianne told us that the dragon is time and that history repeats itself. So it seems we should remember that Dorne opposed the dragon and was successful. We also have the Martell banner, Defiant. The Martell banner is the joining of the Rhoynish sun and the Martell spear after the Rhoynish escaped from the Valyrians. So the ghost of Ghost Hill seems to be an anti-Valyrian and anti-Targaryen history of Dorne. It's very interesting that Arianne is visiting here on her way to visit Aegon. Now, a fairly significant aspect of Ghost Hill is that it's chalk white. And it's chalk white because it seems to be made from chalk. Chalk is of course mined, which means Ghost Hill must have a bunch of mines in the area. And this likely explains why the area was immune to dragons. The people probably hid in the mines and escaped dragon fire, much like people hiding in bunkers to avoid bombings. Ravens had flown ahead to warn Lady Tolland of their coming, so the castle gates were open, and Nymella's eldest daughter rode forth with her steward to meet them near the bottom of the hill. Tall and fierce, with a blaze of bright red hair tumbling about her shoulders, Valenna Tolland greeted Arianne with a shout of, "Come at last, have you? How slow are those horses?" So Valenna Tolland comments on the party taking its time, and so I do wonder how long ago Valenna was told about this trip. Whatever the case, we are once again reminded that Doran is acting slowly, despite telling Arianne to go swiftly. The party could have taken a ship, but they instead go by land. Now there are other delayers out there, namely Stannis, but he does this for strategic reasons. I do wonder what Doran's motivation is for delaying Arianne. Is he waiting for Aegon to take Storm's End? Or is he waiting for the arrival of the Tyrell army? And if so, why? Now we know that Doran doesn't seem to trust his maester, and yet here he sends ravens to warn of Arianne's coming. Even if Feathers sent off this raven in the first place, the Tolland maester, Maester Tommen, would receive it, and he would likely pass this information on to the Citadel. Doran Martell is not acting very secretive. Swift enough to outrun yours to the castle gates. We'll see about that. Valenna wheeled her big red around and put her heels into him, and the race was on, through the dusty lanes of the village at the bottom of the hill, as chickens and villagers alike scrambled out of their path. Arianne was 3 horse lengths behind by the time she got her mare up to a gallop, but had closed to one halfway up the slope. The two of them were side by side as they thundered towards the gatehouse, but 5 yards from the gates, Elia Sand came flying from the cloud of dust behind them to rush past both of them on the back of her filly. "Are you half-horse, child?" Valenna asked, laughing in the yard. "Princess, did you bring a stable girl?" So Arianne and Valenna race, but in the end it's Elia, out of nowhere, who ends up winning in a surprise. This contest is actually structured much like many of the battles that we find in Ice and Fire. 2 foes compete, much to the horror of the small folk, and then a surprise army shows up and wins. When the Gold Cloaks and Stannis faced off at the Blackwater, who won? The Tyrell army. When Theon and Roderick faced off at Winterfell, who won? Ramsay. When the Wildlings and the Night's Watch faced off at the Wall, who won? Stannis. Now, quite notably, Valenna calls Elia half-horse, which is another reference to Lyanna Stark. Roose Bolton once called Lyanna half a horse, and Lady Dustin once called her a centaur, which is a half-horse, half-human. So it's interesting that we have a wild tomboy girl who is of an age with Lyanna at Harrenhal, who is now being called half a horse. "I'm Elia," the girl announced. "Lady Lance." Whoever hung that name on her had much to answer for. Like as not, it had been Prince Oberyn, though, and the Red Viper had never answered to anyone but himself. "The girl jouster," Valenna said. "Yes, I've heard of you. Since you were first to the yard, you've won the honor of watering and bridling the horses. And after that, find the bathhouse," said Princess Arianne. Elia was chalk and dust from heels to hair. So we find out that Elia is a female jouster. Now many have theorized that the jousting Knight of the Laughing Tree at the Harrenhal tourney was in fact Lyanna Stark. Lyanna was the one, after all, who got herself most involved in Howland Reed's dispute with the bullying squires. And so now we have a wild tomboy girl who is of an age with Lyanna Stark at Harrenhal, who is described as half a horse, now being described as a jouster. At this moment, Elia is even white like a weirwood covered in chalk. If she happens to be laughing along with Valenna, she has become the Laughing Tree sigil. We seem to be really getting hit over the head with parallels between Elia and Lyanna. Now interestingly, Elia says her nickname is Lady Lance, a name that Arianne thinks Oberyn bestowed on her. But I'm not so sure. It was actually Ilaria who earlier allowed Elia on the trip as a lady, not a lance. It was Ilaria who was referencing Elia's nickname and her dual nature. That night, Arianne and her knights supped with Lady Nymella and her daughters in the great hall of the castle. Tiora, the younger girl, had the same red hair as her sister, but elsewise could not have been more different. Short, plump, and so shy she might have passed for a mute. She displayed more interest in the spiced beef and honey duck than in the comely young knights at the table, and seemed content to let her lady mother and her sister speak for House Tolland. So the Tollands are redheads, which is a bit curious. One would expect the Tollands to be salty Dornish based on Ghost Hill's location, but they appear to be stony Dornish. Of course, George R. R. Martin has a special fascination with red hair. Both of his wives were redheads, as was Catelyn, Sansa, Ygritte, Mad Donnell Lawston of Harrenhal, and Lady Rohan from the Sworn Sword. Redheads are supposedly lucky and kissed by fire, and it's worth noting that even werewoods are redheads. Now the Tollands' red hair may mean that they don't have much Rhoynish blood in them, but they do seem to have adopted the Rhoynish way of life. Lady Nymella is obviously named after Queen Nymeria, and she, like all of our other redheads, is a strong woman. Now we have 2 redheaded sisters, Valenna and Tiora, which evokes our other redheaded sisters, Cat and Lysa. In their youth, Cat was the more outgoing one, while Lysa was the shy one. just like Valina and Tiora. We've heard the same tales here that you have heard at Sunspear, Lady Nemella told them as her serving man poured the wine. Sellswords landing on Cape Wrath, castles under siege are being taken, crops seized or burned. Where these men come from and who they are, no one is certain. Pirates and adventurers we heard at first, said Valina. Then it was supposed to be the Golden Company. Now it's said to be John Connington, the Mad King's hand, come back from the grave to reclaim his birthright. Whoever it is, Griffin's Roost has fallen to them. Rainhouse, Crow's Nest, Mistwood, even Greenstone on its island. All taken. So Lady Nemella and her daughter strangely put forward the idea that things are uncertain in the Stormlands. Sellswords, pirates, adventurers, the Golden Company, John Connington. Except there is no uncertainty here. Yes, it's sellswords. Yes, it's adventurers. Yes, it's the Golden Company. Yes, it's John Connington. We know all of this. John Connington sent a letter to Doran saying it was the Golden Company, which is a sellsword company filled with adventurers. Griffin's Roost is even the seat of House Connington. At this point, it's pretty obvious who's arrived. And yet the Tollands are trying to insert doubt and skepticism when there's no need of it, just like Damon Sand was. They even echo Damon Sand's erroneous belief that John Connington is dead, while calling John Con the Mad King's hand. Like Damon Sand, they seem to be trying to discredit John Con. Now we hear about the Golden Company's conquests a bit. Back in the Griffin Reborn chapter, we are present at the fall of Griffin's Roost. Tristan River was then sent to take the Crow's Nest, while Laswell Peak was sent to take Rainhouse. Mark Mandrake allegedly landed on Greenstone by accident and took it. The news that is surprising here is the fall of Mistwood. The Golden Company was gearing up to take Storm's End, so it's interesting that this castle is taken in the opposite direction. Maybe Mark Mandrake took it on his way from Greenstone, or maybe the company just thought it was good to have. Arianna's thoughts went at once to her sweet-spotted Silva. Who would want Greenstone? Was there a battle? Not as we have heard, but all the tales are garbled. Tarth has fallen too, some fisher folk will tell you, said Valina. These sellswords now hold most of Cape Wrath and half the stepstones. We hear talk of elephants in the Rainwood. Elephants? Arianna did not know what to think of that. Are you certain? Not dragons. Elephants, Lady Nemella said firmly. So Arianna is puzzled about the strategy in taking Greenstone. Of course, according to what we hear in the Griffin Reborn chapter, there was no strategy in taking it. It was taken after a purported accidental landing by Mark Mandrake. Whether an accident or not, the Golden Company now has an insanely valuable hostage, Silva Santigar, who Arianna values immensely. I do wonder if Doran sent Silva to Estermont intentionally, figuring that the island would fall into the Golden Company's hands. Or perhaps this is an accident that will come back to haunt the Martells. Now the weirdest piece of news from the Tollands is that there are elephants in the Rainwood. Arianna even asks if she doesn't mean dragons, and Nemella confirms it's elephants. This same exchange about elephants and dragons happened in the Watcher chapter between Arianna and Doran earlier. Of course, elephants in the Rainwood doesn't make very much sense. The Golden Company's elephants are currently lost and unaccounted for, as are about 4,500 of the Golden Company's 10,000 men. Harry Strickland thinks maybe these elephants are on Greenstone, but we have no confirmation of that. The landing point for the Golden Company was on the north side of Cape Wrath, and the company's plan is to take Storm's End to the north. The Rainwood is to the south of the landing point and Storm's End. It doesn't make too much sense for the elephants to be south of everything in the Rainwood. The Rainwood is a boggy, muddy forest by all accounts, and there's no reason to march elephants into them. Even if one accidentally landed on the south side of Cape Wrath, you wouldn't march elephants intentionally into a swamp. You'd march them around or put them back on a ship. So unless someone is talking about the perimeter of the Rainwood or something, the story of elephants in the Rainwood seems to be misinformation. Now perhaps related to this point, we also hear about Tarth being taken. This means that at least some of the Golden Company is north of Storm's End instead of south. So any army that may be marching down the King's Road to face the Golden Company may be vulnerable to a rear attack. This may be why there's misinformation about elephants in the Rainwood. The elephants may not be in the south, they may actually be in the north. And Krakens off the broken arm, pulling under crippled galleys, said Valina. The blood draws them to the surface, our maester claims. There are bodies in the water, a few have washed up on our shores, and that's not half of it. A new pirate king has set up on Torturer's Deep. The Lord of Waters, he styles himself. This one has real warships, 3-deckers, monstrous large. You were wise not to come by sea. Since the red wine fleet passed through the stepstones, those waters are crawling with strange sails, all the way north to the Straits of Tarth and Shipbreakers Bay. Mermen, Volantines, Lyseni, even reavers from the Iron Islands. Some have entered the Sea of Dorn to land men on the south shore of Cape Wrath. We found a good fast ship for you, as your father commanded, but even so, be careful. So we find out that krakens are attracted to blood in the water. Now I believe this relates to Euron and his battle against the Red Wine Fleet in what I call the Battle of Blood. I go over this more in my Forsaken analysis. Euron and his men have been talking about the power of blood, and Melisandre, Makoro, and Aeron have all seen visions of a bloody sea. Now blood to a seafarer is pretty much only valuable as chum, and here we hear about blood attracting krakens. So I theorize that Euron will win the Battle of Blood by dumping massive amounts of blood in the water and attracting krakens to the area. Now Valyna also mentions bodies in the water, which evokes Cotter Pike's letter to Jon Snow about dead things in the water near Hardhome. Here those bodies are washing up on shore. If bodies in the north can wash up, I do wonder if the whites can get past the wall. We also hear about a new pirate at Torturer's Deep called the Lord of Waters, and although we aren't 100% certain, it does sound an awful lot like Araine Waters, Cersei's former master of ships who made off with the royal fleet. Araine is a Valyrian bastard from Driftmark, and the Lord of Driftmark is called the Lord of Tides. The Lord of Waters would be a play on this, with the bastard named Waters filling in for Tides. And the 3-decker ships that Valyna tells us about sound an awful lot like Cersei's missing Drummonds. Araine Waters taking the Stepstones is also a replay of history a bit. Daemon Targaryen and Corlys Velaryon conquered the Stepstones back in the years leading up to the Dance of the Dragons. Now Valyna also tells us of all sorts of sailors passing through the Narrow Sea. We have, of course, the Red Wines on their way to battle Euron, and then we hear about the Lyseni, which might be Salladhor Saan returning home after ditching Stannis and Davos, or it might be the Cell Sails that the Hightowers were trying to hire. There is also the Ironborn, which is certainly Victarion's crew on the way to Slaver's Bay, though almost half of that crew got lost. And there's the Volantines, who are dropping off Aegon and the Golden Company. The mystery group is the Myrish. Stannis did have some Myrish cell sails with him that largely survived the Blackwater back in A Clash of Kings, but we don't really hear about them after the battle. I suppose they abandoned Stannis. Now, we have no idea if these are the same cell sails. It may be that these are just more cell sails that the Hightowers are hiring. Now, the Tollands, funnily enough, say it was wise for Arianne to not come by sea, right before then sending her off by sea. The Tollands say that there are strange sails in the Sea of Dorn landing on the south side of Cape Wrath, which is exactly where Arianne is going. Now I will say that Aegon's crew landing on the south side of Cape Wrath is a bit puzzling. The landing site was on the north side of Cape Wrath, and although it's possible that some got lost, the Weeping Tower has not been taken by the Golden Company, and we don't hear anything about the conquest of Stonehelm. Perhaps when they say the south side of Cape Wrath, they mean Mark Mandrake coming over from Greenstone? I'm not sure why they wouldn't follow the coast all the way to Griffin's Roost, but then again, Mistwood is taken, so perhaps some forces were coming from the south. It's true then. Arianne wanted to ask after her brother, but her father had urged her to watch every word. If these ships had not brought Quentyn home again with his Dragon Queen, best not mention him. Only her father and a few of his most trusted men knew about her brother's mission to Slaver's Bay. Lady Toland and her daughters were not amongst them. If it were Quentyn, he would have brought Daenerys back to Dorne, surely. Why would he risk a landing on Cape Wrath, among the Stormlords? So Arianne believes that the Tollands are not trusted enough to know about the Quentyn quest, and it's hard to say if Arianne is correct about this. The Tollands are not mentioned much in our story before this chapter. They do not accompany Oberyn to King's Landing, they do not have a child at the Water Garden, and they do not attend Balon Swan's feast, even though they are rather close to Sunspear. Doran does seem to trust them enough to host Arianne on her secret quest to the Stormlands, so I suppose that's something, but then again, Doran trusted the Ironwoods with the Quentyn quest, and I would never say that they're very trusted. I could see Doran thinking that the Tollands would support him because they're a female-dominated house and would like Dornish law. Then again, he might be wary of the Tollands because of their stony Dornish ethnicity. It's hard to say, as this is the first time we've run into the Tollands. However, Doran is obviously very secretive and wouldn't volunteer information that he didn't have to. Now, despite both Doran and the Tollands repeatedly saying that dragons are not with John Connington and the Golden Company, Arianne still seems to be open to the idea that Quentyn, Dany, and dragons have arrived at Cape Wrath. Quentyn looms in Arianne's thoughts quite a bit, and she appears very guilty about considering him a foe. And that's all for now. We'll continue on in Arianne I, Part 4.